The first time I realized my new neighbor wasn't just entitled but downright reckless, it was after midnight when the roar of an engine ripped through the silence outside my house. I checked my security cameras and froze. There was Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of our HOA, lining up her SUV like a battering ram aimed straight at my reinforced steel gate. With a deafening crash, she tried to smash through, only to bounce back like she had just hit a brick wall. Smoke hissed from her hood alarms, screamed, and there she stood in the glare of my floodlights, shrieking that I had ruined her car. That's when I knew this wasn't just about HOA rules anymore. This was war. And if Karen wanted to keep rushing my gate, I was going to make sure she paid for it in ways she never saw coming. Before we dive into this wild story, drop a comment below with your city and local time. I love seeing how far this community stretches. I never thought a steel gate could cause so much chaos. To me, it was just a structure, reinforced metal bars, set in concrete posts, a sturdy lock, nothing glamorous. But for my family, it meant safety. My father was nearly 80, his legs too weak to stand without a walker, and my biggest fear was someone breaking in while I scrambled to get him out of harm's way. So when I saved enough money, I hired a contractor, pulled every single permit from the city, and installed a gate that could stop a truck. It was my shield, and it was perfectly legal, at least that's what I thought. The trouble started 3 weeks after Karen became president of the HOA. Before that, she was just another neighbor with a sharp tongue and too many opinions about lawn decorations. But once she had the title, it was like handing a toddler a flamethrower. Overnight, she transformed into a dictator. Suddenly, we were getting letters about community aesthetics and uniform appearance. The grass on my lawn, she said, was an inch too high. The caregiver who parked her Toyota in my driveway was a safety hazard. It was laughable until it wasn't. I came home from a late-night shift at the hospital, my scrubs still smelling of antiseptic, only to find a bright red notice taped to my gate. The bold letters screamed like a scarlet warning: unauthorized structure, immediate removal required. For a second, I thought I was hallucinating. I rubbed my eyes, reread the paper, and felt anger creep up my spine. Unauthorized immediate removal, that gate had more paperwork than my entire house. My father shuffled out to the porch, squinting against the morning light. "What's that, son?" he asked, voice hoarse. I forced a smile, folding the paper. "Just HOA nonsense, Dad. Go back inside, I'll handle it." But the truth was, my stomach twisted with unease. Karen wasn't bluffing. I should have ignored her, maybe called the city first. But part of me thought, maybe this is just a misunderstanding. Maybe she just doesn't know the permits are filed. So that afternoon, I marched to her door, hoping for civility. She opened it before I even knocked twice, her arms folded like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence. Karen wasn't much older than me, mid-40s maybe, but she carried herself with the smugness of a monarch, her lips pursed, eyes sharp. "Oh, it's you," she said flatly. I held up the notice. "Karen, there must be some mistake. My gate is legal. I have all the permits." She cut me off with a scoff. "This isn't about permits. It's about aesthetic integrity. Look around Carter. Every house here has open yards, short hedges, welcoming vibes. Then there's your prison gate. It doesn't belong." I clenched my jaw. That prison gate is there because my father needs protection. He's elderly. He can't run if something happens. I need time to get him out safely. Her smirk widened. "Then maybe this isn't the right neighborhood for you." Something inside me snapped. "Karen, this gate stays. You don't have the authority to order me to remove it." Her smile dropped, replaced by a dark glare. "We'll see about that." Then she slammed the door. That should have been the end. Just another petty HOA dispute. But later that night, as I stared at the blinking red light of my newly installed security camera, I realized Karen wasn't the type to stop. She thrived on control. And she wasn't going to rest until she tore me down. 2 nights later, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. Motion alert, driveway camera. At first I thought it was a raccoon, but when I opened the feed, my blood ran cold. Karen's SUV idled at the bottom of my driveway, headlights cutting through the darkness. She wasn't parked, she was lined up. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, and even through the grainy night vision, I could see her expression: wild, determined, unhinged. "No way," I muttered, sitting up in bed. She wouldn't. But she did. The engine roared, tires screeched, and the SUV lunged forward. I barely had time to blink before the sickening crunch echoed through the night. The front bumper collided with my gate metal, clanging like a gong. Sparks flew, alarms blared. The gate shuddered but didn't budge. Her car, however, crumpled like an empty soda can. Steam hissed from the hood. I scrambled into jeans, yanking a hoodie over my head. My father called from his room, frightened. "What was that? Stay inside, Dad," I yelled, bolting for the door. By the time I reached the driveway, Karen was out of her SUV, pacing like a lunatic, phone in hand. Her face was pale, hair wild, her expensive heels sinking into the gravel. "Are you out of your mind?" I shouted, storming toward her. She spun on me, eyes blazing. "You broke my car." I stared in disbelief. "I broke your car, Karen, you just tried to ram my gate." Her finger jabbed the air, trembling with rage. "This is your fault. If you had taken that ugly thing down like I told you, none of this would have happened." I barked a bitter laugh. "You just committed a crime on camera. That's literally property damage and trespassing." For the first time, doubt flickered across her face. But then she doubled down. "I was enforcing HOA regulations," I pointed at her, mangled SUV still hissing in the background. "Oh sure, tell that to the judge when you sue me for your stupidity. Go ahead. Explain how you plowed into private property because you didn't like the aesthetic." She rattled my gate, yanking at the bars like a madwoman. "This thing is a violation. You don't belong here." That's when I hit the floodlights. The yard lit up like a stadium. Karen staggered back, shielding her eyes. The cameras above the gate blinked red, recording every move. I held up my phone. "Karen, leave now. You're trespassing." She froze, glancing at the cameras. Panic flickered. She knew she was caught, but instead of retreating, she hissed, "I'll sue you for damages." I smirked. "Good luck with that." And then, just to twist the knife, I dialed 911 right in front of her. Her eyes widened. Wait, let's not involve the police. We can settle this like adults." "Oh, you mean like how you just tried to demolish my gate with a 2-ton vehicle?" I raised an eyebrow. Too late. The sound of sirens soon pierced the night, red and blue lights flashing against the wreckage of her SUV. Officers stepped out unimpressed. Karen rushed to them, arms flailing. "Thank God you're here. Arrest this man immediately," I almost laughed. But instead I pulled up my phone and showed them the footage. There it was, her SUV revving, surging forward, slamming into my gate. Then her pulling at the bars, trespassing, screaming like a banshee. The older officer sighed. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for attempted property damage and trespassing." Her face drained of color. "No, you can't, he's the criminal," but the handcuffs clicked shut. The clipboard she always carried fell to the ground with a hollow smack. As they led her to the squad car, she twisted her head toward me, eyes venomous. "You think this is over?" she spat. "You have no idea who you're messing with." I stood tall, phone still recording. "Oh, I think I do." The patrol car door slammed, and just like that, Karen was gone, at least for now. But as I stared at the bent bumper of her SUV and the scratches on my still-standing gate, I had this sinking feeling. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat. No, she was just getting started. The neighborhood should have been quiet after Karen's dramatic midnight arrest, but peace never lasts long when you live under the rule of an HOA tyrant. For one brief morning, though, I allowed myself to feel hopeful. As I sipped my coffee on the porch, my father beside me with his newspaper, there was a stillness in the air. The SUV was gone, the flashing lights had faded, and for a moment, it seemed like justice had finally slammed the brakes on Karen's madness. But deep down, I knew better. Sure enough, less than 24 hours later, the storm was back. It started with the sound of heels clicking against the community center floor. I had walked in, notice crumpled in my hand, ready to demand answers from the HOA board. And there she was, Karen. Freshly blow-dried hair, a new navy blue suit, and the same smug expression plastered across her face as if she hadn't just spent the night in a police cruiser. Well, if it isn't our neighborhood troublemaker," she drawled, lifting her coffee cup like a queen addressing a peasant. I froze. "How the hell are you even here? You were arrested." She gave a dismissive wave. "Misunderstanding. Nothing the board couldn't sort out." The HOA secretary, a frazzled woman who looked like she desperately wanted to retire, cleared her throat. "Mr. Carter, the board convened an emergency vote this morning. Karen has been reinstated as acting president." Reinstated? My voice cracked with disbelief. "She rammed her SUV into my gate," Karen smirked. "Allegedly." I almost laughed at the audacity. "You were caught in 4 kelvins, her grin widened. "And yet here I am." She slid a thick stack of papers across the table. "And here's what else is new. Effective immediately, all homeowners with private gates are required to submit to an HOA inspection within 48 hours. Non-compliance will result in fines, and if necessary, forced removal." I snatched the papers, flipping through line after line of jargon, my blood boiling with every word. "You just made this up. There was no community vote." Karen leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I don't need one. Not when the board backs me." That's when it hit me. She wasn't just dangerous behind a wheel, she was weaponizing bureaucracy. Karen had traded the SUV for a stack of policies sharper than any blade. I stormed out before I did something stupid, clutching the notice in my fist. But the moment I got home, I wasn't just angry. I was determined. If Karen wanted war, then I'd fight on two fronts. The first step was research. I pulled out the thick binder I'd been building for months, a Frankenstein of HOA bylaws, complaint forms, and every violation notice I'd ever received. Hours passed as I scoured the documents hunting for a loophole, and there it was hidden like buried treasure. Article 7, Section 14. It stated that any new regulation affecting homeowner structures must be approved by a majority community vote. Karen's shiny new inspection policy was illegal. I wasn't going to tell her that, of course. Not yet. Instead, I went door to door. The Johnsons were first. Retired, polite, and always trying to avoid conflict. But when I explained that Karen had fined them last year for having a single garden gnome, Mr. Johnson slammed his coffee mug down so hard the handle cracked. That woman's been a menace for years. Where do I sign next were the roses. Karen had once fined them for putting up Christmas lights too early in December. They didn't hesitate. Ink hit paper before I'd even finished talking. Then the Wongs, who'd been forced to repaint their entire garage because Karen didn't like the shade of beige. Then the Patels fined for leaving their trash can out an hour too long. By sundown, I had 30 signatures. By the next morning, over 50. Karen thought she had an army. What she didn't realize was that the neighborhood hated her more than dandelions in summer. But I didn't stop there. No, I played her game of control. I went digital. I launched a Facebook group called HOA Reform Taking Back Our Community. Within hours, the posts started rolling in. She fined me for grass being 2 inches too high. She tried to ban my kids from riding bikes on the sidewalk. She called animal control on my Labrador. By day 2, the group had over 100 members. Karen's empire was crumbling, and she didn't even know it. That afternoon, as I watered my lawn, the sharp clack of heels echoed down the street. I didn't even need to look up. Karen, clipboard in hand, lips, pursed eyes, burning holes through me. She stopped at the edge of my driveway, staring like a hawk. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she hissed. I shrugged, still watering the roses. "I don't think, Karen. I know." Her fingers tightened around the clipboard. "You had no right to challenge me." I turned the hose off, meeting her glare. "Actually, I had every right. It's literally in the bylaws. You should read them sometime." Her nostrils flared. "You have no idea who you're messing with." I tilted my head. "Didn't you say that right before the cops cuffed you?" Her face twisted fury, shaking her entire body. "Enjoy your little victory, Carter. It won't last." And then she stormed off. But as I watched her heels click down the street, a grin spread across my face. Because for the first time, she looked scared. I went inside, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and opened my laptop. The petition was ready. The evidence was airtight. And the neighborhood was behind me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had the upper hand. But Karen wasn't finished. No, this was only round 2, and she was about to play dirtier than ever. Because 3 days later, I got a knock on the door. A man in a dark blue city uniform stood there, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Carter," I nodded cautiously. "That's me. Building and Zoning Department. We received a complaint about unpermitted construction on your property. I'm here to inspect your gate." My stomach dropped. Karen had found a new weapon. And this time she wasn't just using HOA rules. She'd managed to pull the city into her war. When the inspector uttered those words, "unpermitted construction," I felt my pulse spike. For a moment, it was like all the air had been sucked out of the world. I had gone through every hoop, every form, every inspection when I first built that gate. The paperwork was filed. The city had signed off. This had to be some kind of mistake. But mistakes don't just wander up to your front door wearing a clipboard and a badge. "Unpermitted," I repeated, trying to keep my voice calm. "That's impossible. I filed everything with the city when this gate was installed. I have permits." The inspector looked sympathetic but unmoved. He flipped through the papers on his clipboard. "According to our records, the permit was revoked 2 days ago." I blinked. "Revoked? How is that even possible?" He shrugged, clearly used to angry homeowners. "I can't say, sir. All I know is what's in front of me. The revocation was processed on the same day this complaint was filed. My job is to confirm whether this structure is compliant. As of now, it's not. 2 days ago, my mind immediately snapped to Karen. The same day, she strutted back into the HOA office in her pristine new suit, reinstated as president. The timing wasn't coincidence, it was a chess move. "So what happens now?" I asked. "If you can't produce reinstated permits within 72 hours, you'll need to remove the structure. Otherwise, fines will accumulate up to $1,000 per day." $1,000 per day. The number hammered through my skull like a drumbeat. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay steady. Thank you, I'll take it from here. He gave me a nod, scribbled something, and left. The moment his car pulled out of the driveway, I let out a strangled laugh. Karen had managed to weaponize the city itself. This wasn't HOA politics anymore. This was bureaucratic warfare. I paced the kitchen, running a hand through my hair. My father shuffled in, leaning heavily on his walker. "What's wrong, son?" I looked at him, at the tired lines etched into his face, at the way his legs shook just standing there. He needed this gate. We both did. And Karen was trying to rip it away from us. "Nothing I can't handle," I lied. "Go rest, Dad." But inside I was seething. That night I dug through my binder again, not just HOA bylaws this time, but every scrap of city paperwork I had. I found the original permits stamped and approved. Proof. The revocation had to be dirty, some string Karen pulled behind the scenes. I emailed the zoning office, attaching scans of everything I had. Then, just in case, I printed 3 copies, highlighted every signature, and shoved them into folders like I was preparing for trial. But I wasn't going to wait around for the city to fix its clerical error. No, I was going to hit Karen where it hurt. The next morning I went digging through public property records. They weren't hard to find, half of it was online, the rest was a short trip to City Hall. And after 2 hours of combing through zoning maps and setback requirements, I struck gold. Karen's backyard fence. She had extended it years ago, right up against the edge of a protected drainage easement. According to zoning law, fences had to be at least 10 feet back. Karen's 4 feet. An unambiguous violation sitting there like a loaded weapon. I couldn't help but grin. She wanted to play this game, fine. 2 can play. That afternoon, I sent an anonymous email to the zoning department. As a concerned resident, I believe 1427 Lakeview Lane is in violation of city setback regulations regarding drainage easements. Please investigate. I attached the records and a screenshot of the zoning map. Then I sat back and waited. It didn't take long. The next morning, I got a phone call from Greg, one of the only HOA board members who hadn't completely sold his soul to Karen. He sounded half panicked, half gleeful. "Dude," he said, "what did you do? What do you mean Karen's losing her mind?" "The city showed up at her house this morning. Something about an illegal fence. She's out there screaming at an inspector right now." I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. Well, isn't that interesting? By noon, I was outside watering the lawn when Karen came storming down the street, face red, phone clutched in her hand like a weapon. She stopped just short of my driveway, practically vibrating with rage. "You did this," she screeched. I raised an eyebrow. Did what her finger stabbed toward her house. "The city is threatening me over my fence. You think this is funny?" I gave a mock gasp. "Wow, sounds serious." Her jaw clenched so tight I thought her teeth might crack. "You think you've won, Carter. But your gate is still illegal. The city already ruled. You have 72 hours. I crossed my arms. "Karen, isn't it funny how the rules you use against everyone else finally came for you?" She shook with fury. "This isn't over." Then she spun on her heel and stomped back toward her house. That evening, I got an email from the zoning department. They had reviewed my permit file and discovered the revocation was invalid, a clerical error. My original permits were reinstated effective immediately. I stared at the screen, grinning like a maniac. My gate was legal again. Karen's fence, meanwhile, was now under official violation with her, given the exact same 72-hour deadline she had tried to saddle me with. The irony was delicious. 2 days later, I stood in my driveway with a cup of coffee, watching as contractors tore down Karen's illegal fence plank by plank. She stood on her porch, arms crossed, glaring daggers at me. I raised my mug in a mock toast. "What a shame," I called. I thought it really added to the neighborhood aesthetics. Her nostrils flared. She slammed her door shut. For the first time in months, I felt victory in my bones. My gate still stood. Karen's precious fence was gone. The neighborhood, once afraid of her, was starting to realize she could bleed. But even as I savored the moment, I knew Karen wasn't finished. A woman like her doesn't bow out gracefully. No, she was going to get desperate. And desperate people are dangerous. The real war hadn't even begun. You'd think that after having her SUV wrecked, being arrested in front of half the neighborhood, and then losing her precious fence to city inspectors, Karen would finally take the hint. Any reasonable person would have crawled back into obscurity, licked their wounds, and maybe learned a lesson about messing with other people's property. But Karen was not reasonable. If anything, losing ground only made her double down. For a brief moment, though, life almost felt normal. The Facebook group I'd started, HOA Reform Taking Back Our Community, was buzzing with energy. Neighbors who had once been silent, too afraid of Karen's wrath, now shared story after story of her petty fines and absurd demands. People laughed, commiserated, and for the first time we were united. My father even cracked a smile reading some of the posts. Finally, he said, sipping his tea, the bully's getting a taste of her own medicine. But bullies rarely give up without a last swing. It started small. My trash bins were knocked over one morning, garbage strewn across the yard. I cursed, cleaned it up, and tried not to think much of it. Maybe raccoons, maybe the wind. But deep down I had a suspicion. Then came the scratching noises. Late at night, when the world was quiet, I'd hear metal scraping outside. When I checked the cameras, there'd be nothing. But by morning, I'd find long gouges carved into my fence posts deep enough that a raccoon would have needed power tools. I knew. Karen was escalating. The confirmation came in the mail. No return address, no signature, just a plain envelope with 3 words scrawled in black marker, "Get out now." I sat at the kitchen table, staring at it, my hands trembling with rage. This wasn't HOA harassment anymore. This was personal. I tightened security, added more cameras, floodlights, even reinforced the locks. But Karen wasn't deterred. If anything, the extra defenses seemed to provoke her. 2 nights later, my phone buzzed with another motion alert. This time when I opened the feed, my stomach clenched. There she was, Karen. Dressed in a dark hoodie, the hood pulled tight over her head, crouched near my mailbox like some 2-bit vandal. In her hand was a can of spray paint, the nozzle already aimed at my fence. I didn't even hesitate. I called 911. While I waited, I watched the screen, my blood boiling, as she scrawled big dripping red letters across the wood, "Neighborhood scum." The sirens arrived faster than I expected. Karen froze mid-stroke, eyes wide, before bolting down the street. But she didn't get far. The patrol car cut her off, and within moments, officers had her pinned, the spray can still clutched in her hand. I threw on a jacket and stepped outside, heart hammering. The officers glanced at me. "This, your property," I nodded, crossing my arms. "And I've got the footage to prove what she was doing." Karen's head whipped toward me, her face twisted in fury. "You set me up," she shrieked. I almost laughed. "Set you up? You're literally holding the spray paint, Karen." The officer looked at her hands, then at the vandalized fence behind me. The dripping red letters glared under the floodlights. There was no escaping this one. "Ma'am," the officer said, voice flat with exhaustion, "you're under arrest for vandalism, trespassing, and harassment." Karen's response was a high-pitched screech that could have shattered glass. "I was protecting this community. He doesn't belong here. I couldn't help it," I laughed. "That's rich, coming from someone who just vandalized private property." The officer recited her rights, cuffed her, and shoved her into the back of the cruiser. She screamed the entire time, insults, threats, wild accusations, but none of it mattered. This time, the charges stuck. By morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. Word spread fast, Karen had been arrested again. And unlike the last time, there was no sympathy. The Facebook group exploded with celebration. Comments poured in, "Finally, justice at last. I hope she rots." For once, it felt like the nightmare was over. The board called an emergency meeting and voted her out permanently. A new president was elected, Greg, the one board member who had quietly supported me all along. He promised transparency, fairness, and to stop using the HOA as a weapon. The mood shifted. Neighbors waved when they saw me. People stopped by to thank me for standing up. For the first time in months, I slept without my phone clutched in my hand. But Karen wasn't done. Because 3 nights later, long after midnight, I heard a metallic clatter from outside, followed by a low, tortured creak. My heart sank. I grabbed my phone, pulled up the cameras, and my blood ran cold. Karen. Again. She looked nothing like the polished, smug queen of the HOA I had once faced. Her hair was wild, her hoodie stained, her eyes unhinged, and in her hands was a crowbar. She was prying at my gate. I dialed 911 immediately, voice shaking as I reported the break-in. But while the dispatcher reassured me help was on the way, I couldn't tear my eyes from the feed. Karen's movements were frantic, desperate, her knuckles white as she yanked and strained. The crowbar clanged against steel sparks flying. My gate shuddered but held. I couldn't just sit inside. I threw on my boots and stepped out into the night. The floodlights snapped on, bathing the driveway in harsh white light. Karen froze, crowbar in hand, eyes flashing with pure rage. "You ruined my life," she screamed, her voice hoarse. "I had everything, and now I have nothing because of you." I held my ground phone, still recording. "Karen, you did this to yourself." For a terrifying moment, she raised the crowbar as if she might actually swing it at me. My muscles tensed, ready to react. But then, faint in the distance, the wail of sirens echoed. Her eyes widened with something between fury and despair. She dropped the crowbar, spun, and ran. She didn't get far. The patrol cars screeched in lights, flashing officers leaping out. They caught her mid-sprint, tackled her to the ground, and within seconds the cuffs were on again. This time she didn't scream, she didn't threaten, she didn't even argue. She just sagged in their grip, silent, broken, as they loaded her into the cruiser. By sunrise, the news spread. Karen had been charged with felony property damage, violating her restraining order, and trespassing again. Because she was already on probation, the judge denied her bail. She wasn't coming back this time. And just like that, the reign of HOA Karen was finally over. But as I stood in my driveway watching the sun rise over my still-standing gate, I couldn't shake one thought. Sometimes the worst battles aren't the ones fought with fists or cars, but with power control and the sheer audacity of one person who thinks the world belongs to them. Karen lost that war, and for the first time in months, I felt free. The morning after Karen's second arrest, I half expected the neighborhood to feel transformed, like the curse had finally been lifted. Birds still chirped the mail, trucks still rattled down the street, and my father still sat on the porch with his morning tea, shaking his head at the absurdity of it all. "Well," he said dryly, "she finally dug herself into a hole too deep to climb out of." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But something inside me, the same instinct that had kept me alive working late-night ER shifts, told me this wasn't over. People like Karen didn't vanish quietly. They dragged chaos with them even as they fell. For a few days, peace held. Greg, the new HOA president, wasted no time undoing Karen's petty rules. The Facebook group was full of relief. Neighbors posted photos of lawn ornaments, Christmas lights, even trash cans proudly left visible from the street, like they were reclaiming little pieces of freedom. Kids rode bikes without their parents panicking about a violation notice. For the first time in years, the HOA felt like a community instead of a dictatorship. But Karen still owned her house. And though she was sitting in jail, I couldn't shake the feeling her influence would somehow creep back. Sure enough, less than a week later it did. I came home from work one evening to find an official-looking letter taped to my gate. My stomach dropped. For a split second I thought it was another bogus violation. But when I tore it down, it wasn't from the HOA, it was from a law office. Notice of intent to sue. I stood there in the driveway reading it under the harsh glow of my floodlights. Karen's attorney claimed I was liable for damages to her SUV, emotional distress, and reputational harm. They demanded I remove my gate immediately and pay restitution. I laughed out loud. She's in jail and she's still trying to sue me. Inside, I laid the letter on the table. My dad picked it up, squinting. "This is insane. She's behind bars." "Yeah," I said, rubbing my temples, "but apparently her lawyer isn't." The next morning, I marched straight into the HOA office, letter in hand. Greg looked up from behind the desk, his eyes widening. "Already," he muttered. "She doesn't quit." I slapped the letter down. "What do we do?" Greg leaned back, sighing. "Legally, she doesn't have much of a case. Your permits are valid, the video evidence is ironclad, and she's already been charged. But people like her don't care about winning. They care about draining you. Time, money, energy, death by paperwork." He wasn't wrong. And if she could manipulate the HOA and even the city once, who's to say she couldn't twist the legal system too? That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk, flipping through my binder of documents, until one thought crystallized. If she wants to play this game in court, fine. But I'll bury her under her own history of violations. So I started compiling. Every neighbor's testimony, every bogus fine, every petty ruling overturned by appeals. I organized screenshots from the Facebook group, digital backups of videos, even archived HOA newsletters where Karen had slipped in unauthorized rules. It wasn't just self-defense anymore, it was offense. 3 days later, I mailed my own packet to Karen's attorney, to the HOA board, and to the city. 100 pages of proof that Karen was not only abusive, but had systematically violated her fiduciary duty as HOA president. I thought that would be the end of it. But Karen had one last card to play. One evening, as I was cooking dinner, my phone buzzed with a notification. New post in HOA reform. I opened it, expecting another neighbor venting. Instead, my jaw dropped. It was Karen. From jail. She had somehow convinced a family member to post on her behalf, painting herself as the victim. I was targeted. I was defending community standards. Carter fabricated evidence. He has the HOA in his pocket. The comments section exploded. 90% of people mocked her, but 10%, the die-hard loyalists she'd groomed, ate it up. She's right, Carter's been stirring trouble. He just wants to tear down our HOA. It was absurd but dangerous. Lies have a way of taking root if left unchecked. I typed out a calm, factual rebuttal attaching screenshots of city permits and arrest records. But I knew this wasn't enough. Karen was playing to public perception. If she couldn't win legally, she'd try to poison the narrative. So I made a video. Standing at my gate, I laid it all out: the notice, the footage of her SUV ramming the bars, the spray paint on my fence, the crowbar. I spoke directly to the camera, my voice steady, my father in the background sipping tea like an unbothered witness to the madness. Karen can call me the villain all she wants, I said. But the truth is simple: this gate protects my family. It was legal when I built it, it's legal now, and no amount of intimidation changes that. What she's done is criminal, and the law agrees. This isn't about aesthetics, this is about control. And we as a community said no. The video went viral, not just in the Facebook group, but across local social media. Neighbors shared it, then people outside the neighborhood. Soon it had thousands of views. Karen's narrative collapsed overnight, but even then she tried again. Through her lawyer, she filed another complaint, this time alleging that my cameras violated her privacy. The irony nearly killed me. She had stood in my driveway screaming at me in full view of the neighborhood, and now she was claiming my security system was the problem. Thankfully, the judge overseeing her vandalism and trespassing cases wasn't amused. At the preliminary hearing, he dismissed her lawsuit outright, warning her attorney that continuing to file frivolous claims could result in sanctions. I walked out of the courthouse that day lighter than I'd felt in months. But Karen wasn't in the courtroom, she wasn't even free to attend. She was still sitting in jail waiting for trial. That should have been the end. But the night after that hearing, I came home to find my driveway littered with broken glass. My father's walker was tipped over on the porch, though thankfully he hadn't been outside. My cameras showed nothing. Whoever had done it knew how to avoid them. I clenched my fists. Karen might be locked away, but she still had friends. And if they thought they could scare me, they were about to learn the same lesson Karen did. Because by now, I wasn't just defending my gate. I was defending my home, my family, and the entire neighborhood from the rot she'd spread. And I had no intention of losing. The broken glass in my driveway was the proof I needed, proof that Karen's shadow still stretched across the neighborhood, even from inside a jail cell. She might have been locked up, but her claws were still digging at me through friends, loyalists, or maybe even family. I swept the shards into a trash bag, every scrape of the broom like nails on my nerves. My father leaned in the doorway, clutching his walker, his brow furrowed with worry. "Son," he said quietly, "they're trying to scare you." "I know," I replied, straightening sweat beating down my neck. "But it won't work." The truth, it was working. I was furious, restless, and half a second away from sleeping with a baseball bat by my bed. But anger has its uses. It sharpens you, makes you dig deeper. If they wanted me rattled, they were about to regret it. That night, I expanded my binder of evidence into something bigger, a dossier. Not just Karen's petty HOA antics, not just her zoning violations, but a full-blown account of her abuse of power, her manipulation, her enablers, and now her intimidation tactics from behind bars. Every screenshot, every video clip, every neighbor's statement went into neatly labeled sections. If she had friends acting on her behalf, I would smoke them out. The next day, I hit the pavement again, door to door. This time I wasn't asking for signatures, I was asking for stories. And neighbors had plenty. The Johnsons admitted they'd once seen Karen's cousin hanging around at night dumping their trash into other people's bins to trigger violations. The Patels said their mailbox had been spray painted years ago, but they'd been too afraid to report it. Mrs. Rose revealed that Karen had threatened to have her husband's business audited if they didn't repaint their shutters. It was worse than I thought. She hadn't just bullied people, she'd built a web of fear, dangling favors and threats to keep control. By evening, I had 30 pages of fresh testimony. And one name kept coming up: Evelyn, Karen's sister-in-law. The loyalist, who always seemed to appear at HOA meetings, backing Karen with a smug smile. That night, sure enough, the cameras caught Evelyn's car slowing at the corner near my house. She didn't get out, but she lingered headlights off before driving away. I posted the footage in the HOA reform group with one caption: "Karen's enforcers are still out there. Stay alert." The comments exploded. Neighbors who had once stayed silent began calling out Karen's allies by name. Evelyn fined us for leaving Halloween decorations up. She reported my son's basketball hoop. She's just as bad as Karen. The tide was turning. But I didn't stop at neighborhood gossip. I filed a harassment complaint with the police, attaching the testimonies and the footage. To my surprise, the officer on duty actually listened. "We've had a few other reports tied to this family," he admitted, flipping through the papers. "If you can provide more, we might be able to open a broader investigation." More, I practically grinned. I had more. For 2 weeks I collected, cataloged, and built the case. Every neighbor who had ever been wronged by Karen or her allies lined up to share. Some brought old violation notices, others had email chains, and a few even had security footage of their own. It wasn't just me anymore, it was the entire community standing together. By the time I was done, my binder had grown into 2 full boxes of evidence. And then came the hearing. Karen, pale and bitter, was escorted into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit. She still carried herself like royalty chin, high eyes, sharp, but the chains around her wrists rattled when she moved. Her lawyer argued she was being unfairly targeted, that she was a concerned citizen standing up for neighborhood integrity. When it was my turn, I set the boxes of evidence on the table with a heavy thud that echoed through the chamber. Gasps rippled through the audience, neighbors who had come to watch to finally see justice. "Your Honor," I said, voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through me, "this isn't about community standards. This is about a pattern of harassment, intimidation, and abuse of authority that has gone on for years. I have here hundreds of pages of records, testimony, and video evidence showing exactly how Karen weaponized her position and how she continued to harass residents even after her arrest." The judge raised an eyebrow, leafing through the top file. The footage of her SUV slamming into my gate played on the courtroom monitor, then the spray paint vandalism, then the crowbar. Each clip landed like a hammer. Karen's face tightened, her lawyer stammering objections, but the judge wasn't buying it. "Enough," he said finally, his voice sharp. "This is not the conduct of a responsible community leader. This is criminal behavior." The gavel came down. Karen's bond was officially revoked. She would remain in custody until trial, with additional charges of intimidation and harassment added to her case. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Some neighbors even clapped before the bailiff silenced them. I exhaled, shoulders sagging with relief. But I knew the war wasn't completely over, because as Karen was led away, she turned her head, eyes burning holes into me, and mouthed the words, "This isn't finished." And maybe she was right. Maybe she still had cards hidden. But one thing was certain: she had lost the neighborhood. That night, the HOA reform group reached over 500 members. Greg announced sweeping reforms: no more arbitrary fines, all rule changes would require a community vote, and the HOA budget would finally be transparent. For the first time in years, people cheered at an HOA meeting. Neighbors approached me in the parking lot afterward, shaking my hand. "You saved us. You stood up when no one else would. Thank you." I wasn't used to being a hero. I was just a guy trying to protect his dad and his gate. But maybe that was the point. Sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to be bullied for others to find their voices. Still, as I locked up the house that night, double-checking every camera and floodlight, I couldn't shake Karen's glare from my mind. Maybe she was finished, maybe she wasn't. But one thing I knew for sure: if she or anyone else tried to come for me again, I was ready. Because the neighborhood wasn't afraid anymore. And neither was I. For the first time since this nightmare began, the HOA meeting felt like something out of a different world. Instead of tense silence and people darting nervous glances at Karen's every smirk, there was laughter. Real laughter. Parents were talking about organizing a block party. Retired couples were offering to start a gardening club. The HOA, the same HOA that had once been Karen's weapon, sounded like a community again. But peace is fragile, and I knew it. Karen was locked up, yes, but her shadow hadn't vanished. Her lawyer was still filing motions every week. Some new paperwork arrived at my door. Sometimes it was about privacy violations from my cameras, other times emotional damages. None of them stuck, but the sheer volume was exhausting. Death by paperwork, exactly as Greg had warned me. Still, I had a secret weapon now: the neighborhood. One Saturday morning, we organized what Greg called the gate gathering. Dozens of neighbors showed up in my driveway. Some brought cookies, others brought their old violation letters like trophies of war. We strung them up on clotheslines like battle flags, each one a reminder of Karen's reign of terror. My father sat proudly on the porch sipping tea while kids darted around the lawn with chalk drawing cartoons of Karen the HOA monster. It was cathartic. For once we were laughing at her, not fearing her. I thought that maybe, just maybe, things were turning around. Then the letter came. It wasn't from Karen this time. It was from the City Building and Zoning Department. I tore it open, heart sinking. It was an official notice complaint filed regarding unpermitted accessory structure. Property inspection scheduled. Accessory structure. What the hell did that even mean? I called the number at the bottom of the notice, my hands shaking. A weary-sounding clerk answered. "Yeah, Mr. Carter, we've had multiple complaints filed about your property. This one alleges you've built an unpermitted storage shed behind your house." I nearly choked. "What shed? I don't even have a shed," the clerk sighed. "Look, off the record, we get this sometimes. Retaliatory complaints. But we have to follow up. Of course. Karen. Even behind bars, she had managed to weaponize the system again. When the inspector showed up 2 days later, clipboard in hand, I walked him around the property. He looked confused, scanning the backyard. "There's nothing here," he muttered. "Just grass." "Exactly," I said, because the complaint was a lie. He scribbled something, then shook his head. "We'll close this case." "But Mr. Carter, brace yourself. When someone's determined enough, they'll keep filing. We can't stop them." That night, as I sat at the kitchen table with my father, I felt the weight settle on me again. Karen might have lost her titles, her SUV, even her fence, but she still had spite. And spite is a stubborn fuel. I could have given up. I could have said, "Let the city deal with it." But then I thought of all the neighbors who'd trusted me, who'd signed petitions, who'd risked standing up. If I backed down now, Karen's tactics would still work. So I doubled down. I called a meeting not of the HOA board, but of the entire community. We gathered in the school gymnasium, folding chairs, creaking under the weight of dozens of frustrated residents. I stood at the front with Greg, a stack of folders in my hand. "Karen may be gone," I began, "but her influence isn't. She's still trying to control us even from jail. She's filing complaints, weaponizing bureaucracy, and hoping we'll give up. But tonight, we draw a line." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I held up one of the folders. Inside are copies of every bogus complaint she ever filed. Every fine she handed down without authority, every violation she invented. "We're submitting this to the state attorney general's office. If Karen wants to fight in court, let her fight the entire state." Applause broke out. Not polite claps, thunderous cathartic applause that echoed off the gym walls. From that night on, we weren't just neighbors. We were a movement. We launched a website, Stop HOA Abuse. We gathered more stories from other communities. We reached out to local journalists. And soon the story spread beyond our little street. News anchors used words like tyrannical HOA president and neighborhood uprising. My video of Karen ramming her SUV into my gate hit 100,000 views online. Karen's name became a punchline. Memes spread. People joked about pulling a Karen whenever someone acted entitled. For the first time, she was on the defensive in the court of public opinion. But she wasn't done yet. At her next court hearing, Karen shuffled in, wearing the same orange jumpsuit, her once pristine hair now a frazzled mess. She looked smaller, weaker, but her eyes still burned with defiance. When the judge listed her charges, trespassing, vandalism, harassment, felony, property damage, her lawyer stood insisting she was the victim of a conspiracy led by me. The judge didn't even blink. "Counselor, your client's actions are on video, multiple times. The court does not recognize conspiracy theories as a defense." The gavel cracked. Trial date set. Karen was led away again, her glare locked on me the entire time. But I didn't flinch, because I had the neighborhood behind me now, and for the first time she was the one isolated, the one outnumbered. Walking out of that courthouse, I knew one thing: the final showdown was coming. Karen wasn't going to fade quietly. And when she made her last desperate move, I had to be ready. Because people like Karen don't go down without taking one last swing. And I could already feel the storm brewing. The storm hit on a Thursday night. I remember because it was trash day and I had just finished dragging the bins to the curb. The air was heavy, the kind that presses on your chest before a thunderstorm, though the sky was clear. My father had already gone to bed. I was locking up when the motion alert buzzed on my phone. I opened the camera feed, expecting maybe a stray dog sniffing at the bins. What I saw froze my blood. Karen. Somehow, someway, she was back. She wasn't supposed to be out. The judge had denied her bail. Yet there she was, standing at my gate, crowbar in hand. Her hoodie was filthy, her hair tangled, her eyes wild. She looked less like the polished tyrant who once ruled the HOA, and more like someone who had clawed her way out of a nightmare. Before I could even react, she jammed the crowbar into the hinges of my gate and started prying. The metal groaned under the strain sparks flying in the floodlight's glare. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers. "She's here," I hissed into the phone. "She's breaking in again. Send someone. Now." The dispatcher's calm voice was a lifeline. "Stay inside, sir. Units are on the way." But I couldn't just stand there. Not this time. I threw on my boots, grabbed my phone, and stepped outside. The floodlights blazed, casting the driveway in harsh white. Karen spun crowbar, raised her eyes, locking on mine. "You ruined my life," she screamed, her voice ragged. "I had everything, and now I have nothing because of you." I held my ground camera pointed straight at her. "No, Karen, you did this to yourself." For one terrifying second, she lifted the crowbar like she meant to swing it at me. My muscles tensed, ready to move, adrenaline surging. But then the faint wail of sirens cut through the night air. Karen's eyes widened, her expression twisting into something between fury and despair. She dropped the crowbar, letting it clatter against the pavement, and bolted. She didn't get far. The squad cars screeched around the corner, lights flashing. Officers leapt out, tackling her mid-sprint. Within seconds, her wrists were cuffed again, her face pressed to the asphalt. This time, there were no theatrics. No screaming about HOA rights, no smug speeches about community standards. She was silent, almost broken, as they hauled her to her feet and shoved her into the back of the cruiser. The officer approached me, notebook in hand. "You okay, sir?" I nodded, my throat dry. "Yeah, got it all on camera." He sighed, glancing at the crowbar. "She's not walking away from this one. With her history, the DA will push for felony charges." And they did. By the end of the week, Karen's list of charges read like the rap sheet of a career criminal: felony property damage, trespassing, harassment, vandalism, violation of a restraining order. Because she was already on probation, the judge ordered her held without bail until trial. For the first time, it felt final. The neighborhood erupted with relief. The HOA board, now led by Greg, passed reforms that stripped away the arbitrary fines Karen had thrived on. Community votes were mandatory for any new rules. Transparency became the norm. People actually smiled at HOA meetings. The Facebook group turned from a battlefield into something almost wholesome. Neighbors organizing potlucks, parents swapping, babysitting offers, retirees sharing gardening tips. The fear that had once poisoned every interaction was gone. As for me, I kept my gait. Sturdy, legal, unyielding. A symbol of everything Karen had tried to destroy and failed. A month later, word came down. Karen had sold her house from behind bars. Whether it was to pay legal fees or because she knew she'd never set foot in the neighborhood again, I didn't care. She was gone. And just like that, the reign of HOA Karen ended. But the scars remained. For months, I'd flinch at the sound of an engine revving outside at night. My father still asked, sometimes nervously, "She won't come back, will she?" "No, Dad," I'd tell him, steadying my voice. "She's gone for good." And I believed it. Because in the end, Karen's downfall wasn't because of me alone. It was because a neighborhood she once terrorized finally stood together. Because people who had once been silent found their voices. Because the truth, documented, recorded, undeniable, was louder than her lies. Karen thought she could control us forever. Instead, she taught us how to fight back. Sometimes the battles we fight aren't just about gates, lawns, or rules written on paper. They're about dignity, about refusing to bow to bullies who hide behind titles and policies. Karen tried to crush me with fear, but all she did was show me and my neighbors that strength lies in standing up together. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: don't let anyone convince you their power is absolute. Even the loudest tyrant can fall when ordinary people refuse to bend. And if you've ever had your own HOA Karen moment, whether it was a neighbor, a boss, or anyone who thought they could push you around, I want to hear it. Drop your story in the comments, share where you're watching from, and let's remind bullies everywhere that their reigns don't last forever. And if you enjoyed this saga, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what comes next, because trust me, in neighborhoods like mine, the drama never truly ends.